Hotep, his brother Beniti, Amun Ray, back for another post. What we're going to talk about today, let's get myself situated here. What we're going to talk about today, the Egyptian divinities, and how the Egyptian divinities connect to you, your DNA, and how they all connected, they're all one. Some of the information I will be using tonight, some suggested good reads you might want to look into getting. This book is hard to get because it's not a lot in print. They do have some copies of it on Amazon, but they're selling it for a ridiculous price because it's out of print. Just so you can see the name of this book, The Egyptian Divinities, the All Who Are One. This has a lot of powerful information in it. Again, if you can come across it, it's written by Mustafa Gadawa, who's also the founder of the Tahuti Research Center. You can actually get it through him, probably cheaper. But again, it's a rare book. Also, this book here, Dr. Delbert Blair just released his book about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. It's called Man, Woman, and Child by Dr. Delbert Blair. Excellent book. You can go to his website and get this book directly, and his website is the Meta Center 2, the number 2, don't type in 2, the metacenter2.com. You could also go to his website again to assist in his medical recovery and some of the medical procedures he just had. The phone number and the contact information is on there. You could call and you could help out and assist with that. Dr. Delbert Blair is still recovering. He's doing fine, resting and recovering until he's ready to get back on the forefront and teach as he always does. Another good read, this you can pretty much find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get this book anywhere. It's the Ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead, the translation by Raymond Faulkner. Excellent book. Definitely. Gets in-depth detail historically, some of the hieroglyphs that are coming forth by day. Out of the many books that's out there, this is probably in the top 10 for translations of coming forth by day. So we're kind of going to be using various information. So basically what we want to talk about is removing the spookism out of dealing with Egypt and the Egyptian divinities, because unfortunately some people still who claim to be spiritually conscious and might per se be up on Egypt on their studies, but still kind of take the Egyptian mysteries and the Egyptian mystery system and subconsciously may not be aware of it and turn it kind of into a religion. And what the point of kind of the stuff we're going to touch on tonight is, the fact is not to go outside of ourselves and spook it out. And stop looking at these deities as if they exist outside of ourselves. And sometimes we like to do what monotheism has done for us for so many years and brainwashed us. When I say monotheism, I'm talking about the three mainstream modern day monotheistic religions, which are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And the reason why I say modern day, because the way that those religions were practiced in their pure or ancient forms is nowhere along the lines of how they're practiced today. When you go back to the Coptic Christians, or the Coptic Christians as some pronounce, in ancient Egypt, to this day, there's roots there and the practices are still there. It's not practiced of what we know as modern day Christianity here in the Western Hemisphere. When you go back and look at historically how ancient Islam was practiced in Nubia and Northeast Africa, it's nothing anywhere along the lines the way it's practiced right now amongst these Arabs in what we know falsely as the Middle East. And then obviously when you look at Judaism and you go back to the ancient Hebrews, the real ancient Hebrews of Ethiopia, Abyssinia, the way the Philotians practiced it is not the way these imposter Jews of today, who converted over to the religion and actually have added a bunch of man-made traditions that they call the Talmud, just as the modern day Muslims have added a lot of man-made traditions called the Hadith or the Sunnah, and Christians have added their own tales called the books of Paul. So these religions we have to get established in our mind took the core essence of our ancestral teachings and spooked them out. What these religions taught you to do was to look for God outside of yourself. That's the biggest problem with these religions. They took God and made God some spiritual spook force that existed outside of yourself, and they separated you from the very essence of that creation. Now, the funny thing is, when you read the very first book of the Bible, in the book of Genesis, in the 2nd chapter, the 7th verse, the one thing it says in there that they neglect is that God breathed into man, all human beings, the breath of life, and they became living souls. So that simple quote right there in Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 says the essence of the Creator exists within us, not outside of us. Because if we are all living souls, and infused in our being was the very essence of the Creator, we have to get in tune with that spiritual force. Okay, then what they did was, as these biblical stories progressed, they took the prophets and the stories that you have conglomerated in your modern day Bible from other ancient stories and changed the name of a lot of the characters of these people to fit their story and their description of their culture, their people, their language at that time. So then we started to evolve more towards man worship as opposed to looking within for the divine essence of the Creator. This is where we are today in the modern world, where the average religious person that's very religious, that's completely governed by faith and belief. This is why you've heard me say on many different classes they're the hardest person to reach, to talk to, because they deal and they're stuck in the realm of faith and belief. They don't, or they can't mental or visualize anything outside of their concept of faith belief, anything outside of their concept that there's a God that exists in heaven and He sent His Son and His Son saved the world. It's that 1, 2, 3 step programming that they're under so heavy that it's hard to reach that person. So when they're dealing with the Egyptian divinities, the deities, whatever term you want to call them, you're going to find it's all connected. And each Egyptian divinity or deity represents a spiritual force of energy in nature, and it represents an archetype in your DNA. And these stories, when dealing with the deities in Egypt, until you get to the actual genealogy of who we call the Holy Family, Aset, Asaru, and Heru, who some know as Isis, Horus, and Osiris in the Greek, that started the royal bloodline lineage. So let's establish, I think where some people get lost in studying this information, you had a literal portion of these entities that walk the earth, and there's a direct royal lineage that connects to these bloodline ancestors. But when the stories were told of the higher archetype deities, such as Geb, which represented the sky, which represented the earth, Nut, which represented the sky, you had many different manifestations of the deity Ra, or many physical incarnations of Ra who were appointed as priesthoods and who were also given triads in different nomes and regions in ancient Egypt. You'll find many different triads of Ra or Re. So what does this really mean? Now some people get confused because when you look at the higher archetype of deities that represent nature and creation, just as such as the ones I said, again, you have Geb, earth, you have Nut, which represents the sky, Tefnut, representation of water. Okay, you have Ra, who represents the sun, Shu, representation of the wind. You have Satuk, who represents fire. You have the deity Kansu, who would be equivalent to the Holy Spirit, or the spiritual powers, or an incarnation of what the Bible or religion calls the Holy Spirit, for lack of a better word. They took that aspect or that concept and conceptualized it from the deity Khonsu and the story of Khonsu in the Egyptian writings, and that's what they refer to the Holy Spirit in the Bible. So these are all archetypes that represent certain energies. These archetypes and these energies exist within your DNA, and you have the ability to access these spiritual energies. Okay? So this is what we have to take into account when fully understanding what this means. We have to stop looking at, such as, for an example, if you look behind me, you see a statue of Anubis. If I go over there, you'll have a representation of the deity Ra. Those were representations of these spiritual entities / energies, but they weren't meant to be worshipped. Now, the problem that I have, I see some people venerate these things, and they actually subconsciously worship them, which goes against the very nature of self. That's not what the purpose of them was for. That's no different than a Catholic that goes into a church and grovels in front of statues of Mary and Joseph and Jesus and some of the saints and the icons. Kind of what they're guilty of doing also in what is watered down Yoruba today called Santeria, where they actually have statues and icons of all these deities and saints, and they venerate them and they worship them and they give them offerings. This is what we have to get away from, because what the problem with that is, it's again going outside yourself, trying to find the existence of the Creator. And what it does is it disconnects you from that DNA or that self-master that resides within. We have to get out of this way of thinking, because things will never change for us as human beings, and we will never evolve to the highest level of our potential if we keep having that mindset. And that mindset of looking outside of ourselves for the answers. So let's go into Mustafa Gadawa's book, or he's also known as Ma Keru, which is his spiritual name. We're going to go into the very first portion in chapter 1. I want to read something on page 17. The one is all. Now this kind of connects with, again, something, as you know, that I very, very am a firm supporter of, is the doctrine of the 7 principles of Tahuti. I think for anybody really trying to understand these concepts and connecting it to self, and understanding rhythm, vibration, frequencies, mentalism, the all is one. This connects to the first principle, the doctrine of mentalism, that the all is one. Now, it's a very simple statement, but you really need to meditate and reflect on it and really understand what does that really mean, because a lot of conscious people like to throw around terms that they sound beautiful, they sound nice, but what does that really mean? Okay, we say, well, the one is all, that means all things are one, right? But do we ever really stop, reflect, contemplate, and meditate? Because you will find out every person, because they're on, or they're at a different level spiritually in their consciousness and evolution, if you really sit, meditate, and reflect on that, that's going to have different meanings to different people. People are going to connect that very statement on a multitude of different levels. So you really need to meditate and reflect on that, and you'll be surprised the influx of thoughts and energy that comes, and you will hear the voice of your ancestors speaking to you, your spirit speaking to your guardian, speaking to you, connecting you to that very, very concept. Alright, so it says the ancient Egyptians believed in one God who was self-produced. This is very important. Self-existent. Now, I didn't say some spook force created it. Immortal, invisible, eternal, omniscient, almighty, etc. This one God was represented through the functions and attributes of his domain. These attributes were called the Natiru. Okay, and the Natiru simply is the root word that we know in English as nature. Neter, Nitir, Natiru. They were representations of nature, as we just discussed. The terms gods and goddesses are a misrepresentation of the Egyptian term Natiru. Let me say that again. Some people will take that word Neter, Natir, or Natiru and correlate that as representing gods and goddesses. That's where it goes back to physical worship. That's not what the terminology means. When you understand what the word Netir or Natiru means, it means connecting with those spiritual energies or those spiritual forces. That simple. But again, even sometimes in spiritual consciousness, people are duped into believing that Nitarat, which is plural for a group of Nitir, Nitiru, Neter, are representations of these male and female physical beings. So we have to correct that fact. When we ask who is God, we are really asking what is God. Okay, think about it for a minute. If you're conversing with somebody or you're having a dialogue with somebody, you might be having a friendly debate, you might be having a heated debate. And people, when they ask the question, who is God, subconsciously what they're really asking, what is God? Because most people don't really understand what that is. Most people have a self-programmed concept that God is some being that resides in a place called heaven, and poof, he snapped his fingers and he created everything. That's the average person who's stuck in the realm of faith and belief. That's what they believe. They believe the kindergarten stories, falsely interpreted from the Bible as being fact, that literally this is kind of how this came about, or this is how this kind of happened. Okay, so the mere name or noun does not tell us anything. One can only define God through the multitude of his attributes, qualities, powers, actions. To know God is to know the numerous qualities of God. The more we learn of these qualities, known as the Natiru, the closer we are getting to our divine origin. So when you understand the archetypes, the energies, the representations in nature, and how it connects to yourself, you will understand the divine origin of these things. Because you will find out in any spiritual system, any doctrine of higher knowledge, it's always taking you to the master within, not the master without. You will never find that spiritual master outside of yourself. One of the toughest roads to travel is the path of self-mastery. Because in the path of self-mastery, it doesn't mean you can't have guides and teachers and elders to guide you along the path. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to do this completely by yourself, but you should only use those guides, those teachers, those elders, the books and the information you read as a roadmap on the journey. But you are the one that still needs to do all the work. What tends to happen is people get trapped in these schools of thoughts, these organizations, these groups, these religions, these different methodologies and schools of thoughts, and they become exclusive to those things. And as I said before, that cuts off your consciousness. It disconnects your DNA from your ancestors when you exclusively subscribe to one school of thought, one philosophy, one religion, one dogma, one organization, one culture. That's the problem with that. Because then it doesn't become about the path of self-mastery. You put your divinity into the hands of another, and now that individual or group of individuals is responsible for guiding your soul. And if they are not doing it properly, you understand, it could lead to a pathway of failure and destruction and spiritual problems. And this is how a lot of people get jacked up, because they get caught up in these schools of indoctrination. And I've seen it on a multitude of levels over the many years doing this and teaching. I've seen people get jacked up trying to chase sovereignty their whole lives and trying to be a more. And they get jacked up in this because they're given bad information, misleading information. They're told not to pay taxes, don't do this, don't do that, you're a more. And some of them to this day can't even get a driver's license or drive a car anymore because legally they've been so jacked up. This is an example of what happens when you put your divinity into the hands of another without you being in control, investigating, researching for yourself. I'm just using that as one example. Then you have some other nutcases called the Black Hebrew Israelites who give you this religious ideology that some black god's going to come out of the sky and wreak havoc on Babylon and the planet Earth, and that only a select chosen few will be saved and resurrected, which is nothing but another modern day form of European Christianity, whether they want to accept it or not, because European Christians or Western Christians believe the same thing, just kind of a slightly different concept. When you believe these idiotic concepts, okay, this is when you run into serious problems, because now when your mindset is gravitating towards that energy, you're trapped in that process of thought. And again, explaining furthermore why individuals like that you can't reach. And this is why I said a person has to want to change for themselves. You can't force anybody to accept anything. They have to raise themselves up to that realization and want to change. Again, you can pass along information. That's your job as a teacher, as a warner, as an awakener, you know, whatever term, educator, whatever term you want to use. That is your job. But that is all your job is, to pass the information. You can't force anybody to accept anything until they want to accept it for themselves. So this is why religion doesn't work. Because when you force religion on somebody, once they get to a state of mind where they start thinking for themselves and they come to the reality that it's not for them, they gravitate away from it. And this is why it fails. This is why when you look on a wide scale level, if you turn on your TVs and you look at all these evangelists and all these Christian broadcasts and all these pastors, look in the audience. Well over 80% of the people are old. There's not a lot of youth that subscribe to these ideologies or schools of thought, because the youth and the young don't see themselves in it no more. Times are changing. The planet is evoluting on a whole different level. Consciousness is on a whole different level. And this youth that's coming up now isn't on the same mentality as the youth when we were coming up, because it's a more warrior mentality type youth that's coming up now, and they don't see themselves in this passive, you know, ridiculous ideology called religion. And this is why it's actually on the decline. Regardless of what you see on TV, you can see all the images of all these mega churches packed with people. It's packed with mentally dead people, people that are mentally dead. And there's a lot of mentally dead people that flock to these places, but on a wide scale level, there's no generations coming up behind them, which is showing you that there's a change in consciousness in the universe. So it's our job as elders to now come to the youth on their level, so now we can bring them into the fold. So our job is passing this information, teaching it to them so they can teach it to their children, and their children can teach it to their children, to kind of break this cycle of nonsense and ignorance and misinformation that we've been programmed with for a long period of time. People say, how does the change come about? That's how you break the chain, and that's why I keep telling people, before you can have a physical revolution, you've got to have a mental revolution. You've got to change the mindset of people, because once the mindset of people are vibrating on the same frequency and tone, automatically the physical part is going to come together. But you can't go fight a war with a bunch of people's minds all scattered in different places. That's a recipe for disaster. So even though I clown around and joke around a lot about it, and I do that in a way to educate and teach, but it's a serious thing, because some people are instructing us literally with misinformation, which is leading us to a path to suicide. So the way we break that cycle and chain is first by educating and teaching, by bringing these principles and practices back, by taking the information back then and updating it now. Okay, and this is what I mean when I say you can't get the live in the past syndrome. Okay, we can take these principles and informations of Egypt, but how do we take it, apply it to today, and update it? Because the way it applied back then is not going to be the same effective method and way it's going to apply today. So we have to update this information, make it practical for today, and when we pass it on to the children, and they pass it on to their children, and on to their children's children, then we break this cycle. Then change starts to come about. Then you will see things spiritually on a whole different level evolve. The energy grid of the planet changes, because remember, you're constantly giving off and receiving energy, and we talked about that by way of your brain, the neuromelanin, which is a manifestation of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is constantly sending out and receiving energy. So they're constantly working on your thought pattern. And all of these doctrines or systems of indoctrination are focused on that very aspect to work on your mental capacity. That's why physical slavery, to an extent, and I say to an extent because, believe it or not, physical slavery still exists in some places, but for the most part, since physical slavery doesn't exist, it's now you're fighting a spiritual, mental warfare of mental slavery. Mental slavery is strong, it's alive, and it's well. And it's more powerful than physical slavery, because mental slavery is so powerful, because if I can control your thought process and your emotions, I can subconsciously get you to do whatever I want. That's bottom line. It's a more dangerous form of slavery. And when you're asleep and then you're in a mummified mental state, you're not conscious of it. You don't realize it. You're kind of doing things against your better judgment. Alright, so it goes on to say, far from being primitive, polytheistic form, this is the highest expression of the monotheistic mysticism. Okay? Let's go to the image or the concept of God. So many phrases are being used throughout the world which consistently state that the human being is made in the image of God, i.e. a miniature universe. That to understand the universe is to understand oneself, and vice versa. Yet no culture has ever practiced the above principle like the ancient Egyptians. Central to their complete understanding of the universe was the knowledge that man was made in the image of God, and as such, man represented the image of all creation. Accordingly, Egyptian symbolism in all measures were therefore simultaneously scaled to man, to the earth, to the solar system, and ultimately the universe. The concept of the Egyptian monotheism can also apply to man, the image of God. If we refer to, say, a person as Mr. X, it means nothing to us. However, once we describe his attributes and qualities, we then begin to know him. A person who is an engineer, a father, a husband, etc., does not have polypersonalities, but rather a monopersonality with multiple functions and attributes. For the ancient and Baladi Egyptians, the concept of God is similar, logical, and only way to explain anything to human beings is on humans' terms and in human form. I want to touch on that in a minute. As such, the complicated scientific and philosophical information was reduced in ancient Egypt to events in human images and terms. Now, again, two key things to understand what we just talked about right there. It said up here, the very first paragraph, that human being is made in the image of the Creator. Example, a miniature universe, and that to understand the universe is to understand oneself. That's very important. So if you understand creation and nature and how it works, you will understand the Creator, you will understand your very existence, and you will understand how you came about. All an internal war that you have to conceptualize inside yourself. And I say an internal war because every time you have to exercise your willpower to think, there is a war literally going on inside the mind. Then it goes on down the bottom, which I think this is very key, and this is what gets a lot of people stuck. It says the logical and only way to explain anything to human beings is on human terms and in human form. Now, this is what I meant when I said a few minutes back. For somebody that's trapped in faith and belief, when you start talking metaphysics, quantum physics, alchemy, it's hard for them to relate and grasp to it, because it's not on that physical or that mortal term that they're accustomed to. Because it's easy for somebody to be asleep and lazy and say there's a heaven, there's a God in the heaven, He created everything, there was a prophet or prophets that were sent, and then the Savior was sent, there was a book given us to follow these rules and restrictions, follow these rules and restrictions, go and heaven. See, that's easy. That's basic, get in line and do as you're told and don't think for yourself, because rules and regulations are constantly being dictated to you. But when you talk about inner alchemy, metaphysics, and you talk about all these scientific and spiritual concepts, to really grasp the meaning of these things, you lose these people, because they can't think outside that box. So this is what it means when it says they're only comfortable with things being explained to them in basic human form. Okay, so they can conceptualize with the physical concept of a man. That's God. But they can't conceptualize or understand the concept that the Creator exists within themselves, and they are a physical manifestation of the Creator, and that they are an incarnation of all the genetics of their ancestors. Okay, that's what you're looking at when you look at yourself. All of the deities, when we go back to ancient Egypt, we will find they exist within us. Okay, and to tap into those deities by way of meditation, various different rituals, and ancestral magic, you activate that force, that energy. You can call it chi, you can call it the kundalini, as some say, many different terminologies, which is raising that energy up and being able to connect with the divine consciousness, as we call it. You have to experience that for yourself. You can read multiple books on it. People can talk to you about it, but until you experience it for yourself, it's not the same thing. Okay? Let's continue on. We're going to skip around this. We're going to do one more section of this before we close out. And we'll continue this. We're going to stay on this for a little bit. Picturing the divine powers. We'll stop there, and then maybe we'll get into it. Oh, we'll stop there. In order to simplify and convey the scientific and philosophical meanings of the Natiru, some fixed representations were utilized. As a result, the figures of Aset, Asar, and Heru became the symbols of such attributes, functions, forces, and energies. These pictorial symbols were intended merely to fix the attention or represent abstract ideas, and were not intended to be looked upon as real personas or personages. As the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is why I was saying in the very beginning, some people have taken these deities and made them physical beings, and they actually venerate and worship them. That's not what these sacred teachings from our ancient ancestors were and represented. They were symbols which were intended merely to represent abstract ideas and were not to be looked upon as actual personages. Okay? Egyptian symbolism could be compared in some sense to modern day caricature. Caricature used symbols such as Uncle Sam, the Russian bear, the British bulldog to represent concept, ideas, or nations. Like what it's saying here is, when you see the picture of Uncle Sam, and you know that old picture, looking like an old man with a red, white, and blue hat on, says Uncle Sam wants you, you think of America, the United States Army. You think of being recruited. It represents a symbol of America, because remember, I said this before, symbols carry energies, symbols carry images. So soon, and it's a good example that it's using there, as soon as you see that picture of Uncle Sam, it conjures up images and thoughts, because immediately that image connects you with those thoughts and the energy that's connected to that symbol. And that's why I keep telling people, when you're wearing all these different symbols, the Ankhs, Scarabeetles, all these, whatever culture, make sure you really understand what that symbol represents, and most importantly, like I said, make sure you charge that symbol with your own spiritual energy. Very important. And to show you it can be done, the Uncle Sam picture, because the United States government charged it with their energy to get a certain concept of thought and crush your mind, and it works. And you want to know how it works? Let me say something else and watch what's going to happen. When I say McDonald's, what's the first thing you saw? Don't bullshit yourself. You saw the golden arches. Okay? It's the first thing that came to your mind. You saw those two golden arches, because that symbol is automatically connected to McDonald's. You hear the word McDonald's, you think of the golden arches. That's just a fact. Okay? When I say the New York Yankees, you see this symbol on my cap, especially those that are familiar with sports. Automatically, this symbol becomes affiliated with the baseball team, the New York Yankees. List goes on and on. We could do this concept with a million different things. They know this, and certain symbols and colors can incite certain reactions and emotions in you, such as it can incite reactions as hunger. Certain colors you can see when you're watching advertisements late at night, you may not be hungry, but there's a certain symbol, a color, and energy they send out that starts to make you crave and want a certain food. So this is a powerful tool. I mean, we haven't even really touched on that. That's getting on a whole nother spiritual level. But to show you that this is what this concept is talking about here, and using that Uncle Sam thing is a powerful example. A symbol reveals to the mind a reality other than itself. For the informed, the cartoon can reveal a legitimate symbolic form, the totality of a given situation in the eyes of the individual cartoonist. For those unfamiliar with the cartoonist and his or her choice of symbols, the cartoon will be total nonsense. So if you don't understand the origin of it, it's going to be total nonsense. That's the same thing if somebody doesn't really understand the Egyptian mysteries and they're stuck in the realm of faith and belief. It's going to sound like total nonsense to them. Let's leave off with this last paragraph, then we'll close. Practically all figures on the walls of Egyptian monuments are in profile form, indicative of action and interaction between the various symbolic figures. A wide variety of actions in the forms are evident. Okay, so the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Okay? It's the same thing for years when they wanted to stamp a certain image of Jesus in your mind. Right? They've stamped a certain image of how Jesus looks in your mind for thousands of years. Go back to Michelangelo, the Sistine Chapel. So images are powerful and important. So people can't say they're not. And for people that say that there's no racism in religion, they're completely ignorant. Because most religions portray Jesus as looking European. And it's something that's been enforced on people for hundreds of thousands of years. Okay? For thousands of years. So we can use many different analogies to understand the power of image and symbolisms. And that's exactly what they represent. So, long story short, in the first portion of this, and we're going to continue with this more than likely because the spirit is dictating we need to stay on this topic for a little bit. I'm going to let you ingest that for now. Again, meditate on it. Look into the information. Assimilate it. Make it a part of your DNA so you can understand this, understand this, and overstand this. Okay? Very important. So the point being is, real simple, do not go looking for the essence and origin of the Creator outside of yourself. It's the biggest mistake you can do. It's not an outward journey in, it's an inward journey out. Okay? And there's a quote, if you go into your, which people like to so do, let me see if I can find it actually. And I like to read this because most people who say they read the Bible don't really understand the Bible, because if you look at the Bible from a metaphysical aspect, it takes on a whole different meaning. Okay? You can't look at it literally, because then you're going to get trapped in certain concepts of faith and belief. Let me find it here. Let me go grab it. Okay. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to finish with this. Very important. Hold on. Let me go get one of my 50 Bibles. It's another thing. Read different translations. But anyway, if you go into the what they call the first letter, the epistles of John, not the Gospel of John, Okay. It is actually chapter 4. I want you to go read this, and this is something I always present to religious people because they never understand this. If you go into the first letter or epistle of John, not the Gospel of John, okay, and I want you to go into the 4th chapter of the first letter of John, and I want to go to verse 20. Okay, and I'm going to read the King James translation of it, and then one Bible that I recommend you really get, so you can do your historical research, is this Bible here, the New Oxford Annotated Bible. Okay, you will find out this Bible historically gives you a lot of information. I'm going to point 2 things out. And then obviously you got to have your King James Slave Master Bible, because this is sometimes, unfortunately, only shit people will believe. So have both. But this is the most part, the spooky shit that you got to teach people from. Alright, so it says in here, first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 20, if a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, you know, the classical English, because God spoke in, you know, classical English, which shit kills me. Just remember the King James Version of the Bible is in layman's English. If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he hath loved not his brother whom he hath seen. How can he love God whom he hath not seen? Okay, let me read it from the Oxford Annotated Bible. Breaks it down even a little clearer. Those who say, because he first loved us, those who say, I love God, and hate their brothers or sisters, are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. Okay? So people are representation of their actions. Look at the way human beings behave. Look at the way some of these religious fanatics behave. They talk bad about each other. People are disrespectful to each other. They attack each other, yet they claim to be Christians, and their very Bible says, how can you love God whom you have never seen, but yet you don't even love your brother and sister who you see all the time? I find that statement very powerful when you meditate on it and you really understand it. Now, when you don't look at the Bible from a religious context and you understand the history and the origin of it, it can convey some powerful spiritual messages. But when you look at this book, literally, you're going to get torn apart and jacked up. Now, real quick, I know I said I would close, but sometimes I go somewhere else. Reason why I recommend you get this Bible, I want to point out one thing. In the back of this Bible, the history of this, the maps in the back of this Bible are phenomenal. The research you can do with this Bible is phenomenal. Understanding the true history of the Bible. The back part, I'm going to read something to you, since we were talking about Egypt. Okay, and these are European scholars researching this. Okay, in the essays in the back, it has a whole bunch of historical essays in the back, giving you an abundance of information on the origin of the books. But one thing I found very interesting here, when it breaks down, really, who were the Israelites? I'm going to read something to you. And if you are watching this video and you do have the Oxford Annotated Bible, I'll leave you with this thought. Listen to what these scholars possibly have come to the conclusion, and I say possibly because they can't or cannot prove it, but what they are establishing and who the Bible calls the Israelites couldn't be who they were claiming to be, because it historically doesn't match up with the Egyptian records. I find that very interesting. Really, this kind of destroys the whole concept of their, or the foundation of their Bible, because if you're saying that it's in question that who really the Israelites were and how true is that story of them being in bondage for 400 plus years, that kind of changes things big time. Alright, here we go. In if you do own this Bible, you can look this up right away. This is essay number 507. It's called in the back of the Cultural Context: The Ancient Near East and Ancient Israel to the Mid-First Millennium. Check this out. These scholars have come to this one possible conclusion. A majority of modern scholars, but by no means all, date the central episode associated with Moses, check this shit out now, to the 13th century during the reign of Ramses II, which would be between 1279 and 1213. An earlier date toward the beginning of the Late Bronze Age would link the Exodus with the expulsion of the Hyksos dynasties from Egypt in the mid-16th century, and better fits the chronology in the biblical text, which dates the Exodus to 480 years prior to the construction of the Solomonic Temple in the mid-10th century. Refer to the first book of Kings, chapter 6, verse 1. That's funny how people don't really study their Bible. Shit is funny to me. Because they're so busy being programmed by Reverend Porkchop, because they don't think for themselves. Reverend Porkchop is teaching them and programming them with his system of methodology based on where he went to be raised, where mentally dead people are taught, called the seminarian or seminary. Okay? Because he's indoctrinated with a program system, and then he comes out and passes that program system to his followers. The funny thing is, in their very books, within their very books, they can uncover a lot of the truths and explain a lot of the so-called contradictions that their books make. So this is telling you right here, okay? And just to show you, these scholars that complied this book, because you know people always have terms. If you look in the very beginning, it shows you all the contributors and scholars to these books, okay, who helped translate and put this together, and who helped put the essays in the back together, and the research they did to come to their conclusions. These are all various different Christians, reverends. You can look up their names. You'll see it's a group of scholars that got together. So this is not just anybody's interpretation of it. And again, if you don't have this Bible, show it again. This is the Bible you want to get and read. The New Oxford Annotated Bible. It also contains the Apocrypha in there, which are several other books that are left out from the King James Version, because the King James Version is only giving you 66 books. But this is superior in its history. So again, right there, it's telling you that the Hyksos of ancient Egypt, of the last 46 dynasties of Egypt, that story of the Hyksos being driven out of Egypt is identical to the story, the so-called story in the Bible, of the Israelites. So scholars are saying, because they can't confirm that whole Exodus story with Moses, etc., chronologically they can link it to the story of the Hyksos being driven out of Egypt, because it represents that story identically. You had an individual called Thutmose I of ancient Egypt who led the revolt to drive the Hyksos out of ancient Egypt. And Thutmose has the same meaning as Moshe, Musa, or Moses, he who was drawn from water, or he who was drawn out. So it's not a coincidence that those similarities exist. And as I've said many times before, when you look at the Egyptian records, there's nowhere recorded on record anywhere of any group of people called the Israelites who were in Egypt for 430 years and were driven out. But you do find records of these Greek invaders who were Greek and European and mixed in with the original Africans, Hyksos, who did try to come into Egypt and invade, and they were driven out. They were there for 430 years. These are your pre-dynastic, your dynastic Egyptians of the last 46 dynasties that you only hear about. Nobody ever teaches you about the pre-dynastic Egyptians. So that gets into a whole other story. But anyway, as you know, I can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. I'm going to stop there. I think again I've given enough to ingest. I just want to throw that last portion in there for you to go look up and research. So again, don't spook this out. Look within yourself, and you will find the master you are looking for. Take a look in the mirror. Just to make a couple quick announcements. Again, appreciate everybody tuning in to the Awakening Universal Mind show on TalkShoe.com. Last week, if you listened to the show, we had a little technical difficulties getting Sister Vera Courtney onto the show. We got her on late. We didn't get a chance to do our full interview with her, so we're going to have her back on this week, talking about her book, The Age and What I Know, Unmasking the Magicians. And she gets heavy into breaking down some of the mythologies and fallacies of monotheism in the Bible. And she takes it on a spiritual level. So we're gonna get her back on the show and try to redo this again on Thursday. I believe that's July 2nd at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, the link to the show you can find on the YouTube page here or the Mother Nubia Inc. Google page. So definitely look for that Thursday night. July 9th, we'll have Brother Panic back. Brother Panic has been on the show a couple of times, and he's done phenomenal shows. And he goes definitely heavy into the occult, alchemy, and metaphysics. And we love having the brother on. And I believe he's definitely one of the top teachers out there, because he takes it on a whole different level. So we're looking forward to having Brother Panic back on July 9th. And again, we appreciate the brother coming on the show and blessing us with the knowledge and the information. And we're going to have Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum back on the show on July 23rd. And pretty much these two brothers are some of our key regulars. We try to get them on the show every 4 to 6 weeks. Again, we love having the brothers on the show. Also spoke with Dr. Jewel Pookrum. She wants to do a show on the mechanisms and the different circuits of the brain. So she's very busy. But she wants to set up a schedule to do that, so I'm definitely going to set that back up with her. So we've got some good things coming up on the show. And again, our show comes on Awakening Universal Minds on TalkShoe.com every Thursday 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find the link to that show right here on this YouTube page. I post it weekly, and it's on the Mother Nubia Inc. Google page. All the shows are archived, and the links are there, so definitely you won't miss anything. So we appreciate everybody listening to the show. We're getting listeners from all over the place. It's a beautiful thing. We got people in the Caribbean listening, in Toronto, different parts of Canada listening. We have people overseas listening to the show now in Europe, Scotland, France, England. So there's all over the United States, obviously. So we appreciate everybody listening, supporting, downloading the show. We will also soon spoke with my two good brothers, Ravana Noon, Brother Sargiti, down here in South Florida, central to South Florida, Orlando, Tampa, the Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. We're going to be getting some classes and events going on, and try to bring some people in on these events, and we'll be doing these events ourselves. So we definitely look out for that. We want people to come and attend those classes and events. We also will be putting together some hangout question and answer classes where you could talk to us live, one-on-one, and we could dialogue, build, ask questions. Those will be a little bit more in a controlled environment. So those things are coming in the works. So we'll definitely have one soon. We'll be able to announce those in a couple of weeks. So all I got for you for now. I think we'll pick up on this topic next week. So I hope this information was helpful for you. I hope it raises you up to the realization of who and what you are. And study it, absorb it, meditate on it, and let it become a part of you. And I'm sure some of the answers you're looking for will manifest by way of your DNA and by way of your ancestors that are connected to you by blood. So this is your brother Beniti Amon Ray, aka Brother Michael, checking out, and I will see you on the next post. Hotep.